Today, Netflix earnings hit the tape. As they say on Wall Street, we bring you the most important numbers. Plus, we also heard from Domino's and got some insight into how much pizza Americans have been ordering while they were stuck inside. And finally, a security breach of massive proportions. We dive into the hack that gripped Twitter for hours yesterday and lay bare how exposed we all are to this kind of activity. I'm Mackenzie Sagalos, and this is CNBC After Hours. Let's take a look at how Wall Street finished the day. Stocks closed lower across the board, and the Dow posted its first loss in 5 days after jobless claims, which is finance speak for the number of people filing for unemployment for the first time, came in higher than 1 million for the 17th week in a row. We also got a peek at the financials of Netflix late this afternoon, when the company reported its second quarter earnings. Now, there were two big ads this quarter. The first, 10 million new subscribers, more than the 8 or so million that analysts were expecting. And the second, a new CEO. Chief Content Officer Ted Sarandos has been named co-CEO along with Reed Hastings. Now, that's all good news, but there is some disappointing news too. The company only expects to add 2.5 million new subscribers in the third quarter. Analysts wanted about double that. But Wall Street was focused on one story today, the massive hack that gripped Twitter. Now, we're sure that you've heard by now that dozens of high-profile Twitter accounts were compromised yesterday afternoon. Hackers gained control of accounts like Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Kanye West, Elon Musk, and even corporate accounts like Apple and Uber. With this access, the hackers then displayed tweets from those accounts with a request for followers to send Bitcoin to a specific address, like this one. Now, most were quickly deleted, but it took hours for Twitter to regain control of its platform. In the interim, the company blocked all verified accounts from tweeting out anything. Now, Twitter said this afternoon that the hackers were not able to access password information, but nevertheless, a security breach like this is massive, to say the least. The FBI is now investigating the hack, according to Reuters, and New York State's Department of Financial Services is opening an inquiry as well. Governor Andrew Cuomo called the incident, quote, frightening, and it is. I mean, what happened yesterday is scary, but the truly terrifying thing is that the hack could be just the beginning. We're going all in on this story today, and we asked our newsroom to help. Eamon Javers covers Washington, the White House, and cybersecurity for CNBC. He told us what we should all be bracing ourselves for if and when another hack like this occurs.
Tuesday's hack on Twitter is really a reminder to American companies to be sensitive about cybersecurity and a warning to the American public about what we might see in the run-up to the election in November. Let's start with what Twitter has told us about what happened on Tuesday. They say this was a coordinated social engineering attack, and it successfully targeted some of our employees with access to internal systems. They say they're looking into what other malicious activity they may have conducted or information that they may have accessed. So let's unpack that a little bit. What's a social engineering attack? That's when the hackers use your network of friends and contacts against you by sending you messages in Twitter, DMs, Slack, email, however they want to approach you, that look like they come from your trusted friends and associates. Those messages might even reference some earlier communication you had with that person or some shared knowledge, something that both you and that person would know. It feels real to the recipient, and that's why the recipient clicks on the link or replies to the email. And doing that, the hackers can trick people into turning over information that they shouldn't be turning over. You know, the idea that the hackers were after Bitcoin here is interesting because Bitcoin is one way in which people can sort of launder money around the world and get away with a large sum of money without being caught. The other idea here is that the entire Bitcoin request was itself a cover story. That is, that's not what they were really after. It could be that the hackers were after information, direct messages inside these Twitter accounts, or some other details inside Twitter, and the whole request for Bitcoin was a ruse, right? Because the amount of money that you can make with simultaneous control of all of these Twitter accounts is enormous and hugely, vastly more than what these attackers actually got in Bitcoin. The warning here is really about what can happen in the run-up to the election. You can imagine the political and economic consequences if the goal of this hack had been more than just to steal some Bitcoin. If the goal of this hack had been to sow economic or political chaos, you can imagine a scenario whereby the hackers can get access to these Twitter accounts of very prominent figures in American life and create the impression that something's happening that isn't actually happening. There's a stock is falling, there's an economic calamity, there's a political accusation, somebody's resigning from the campaign. Just about any scenario you can think of could be made to seem realistic if the hackers have simultaneous control of all of these accounts of prominent Americans. So the thing that we're all going to need to bear in mind here as we go forward to November is that there are a number of nation states out there with the capability to do this, or probably a number of hackers out there around the world with the capability to do this. After the 2016 Russian interference in the US election, there may be a lot more people with sophisticated capability who decide they also want to get involved in trying to manipulate American politics. So it may be that we're about to see a lot more of this, not a lot less.
All right, I want to drill down on something Eamon mentioned just now, about how the hackers targeted employees who had access to these accounts. Now, that's what Twitter said last night, and I know it's their explanation, but it raises a lot more questions about the safeguards around personal accounts. We talked to Steve Kovac, our tech editor, about what we think we know about the employee or employees and what else Twitter needs to answer for its users.
So Twitter's response to this was an employee was the victim of what they call social engineering, which typically means they were tricked into providing the login information that allowed the hackers to access all these high-profile accounts. But other reports started coming out, especially in Vice, that it's possible that this Twitter employee who was affected by this social engineering attack was also in on it. It was an inside job, meaning he was either paid by these hackers to provide the access to these accounts, or he cooperated in some other way. And if that's true, it will be the second known instance of an insider at Twitter providing access to personal information from Twitter accounts to the outside. Last fall, the Department of Justice even filed a case against two former Twitter employees who are now being accused of providing personal Twitter information to Saudi Arabian nationals. And that raises a whole bunch of questions about how Twitter handles its security and keeping these high-profile accounts safe. We're told over and over again how to protect our email and our social media accounts, use two-factor authentication, use a different password for every service, use a password manager to keep track of all those passwords. And all of those things are great and everyone should continue to do it. But in this case, it didn't matter because these hackers were able to gain access to this exclusive tool that certain Twitter employees have access to that can literally tweet from any account and dig into and control any account they want. And that's what's really scary. Does that extend to other platforms? Do Facebook employees? Is there someone at Facebook who can have that kind of level of access to accounts? We don't know. The biggest question for Jack Dorsey right now is how are they vetting the employees who have this high level access to high profile accounts? How are they doing background checks? Do they know they can be trusted? There is already that case with the two Twitter employees who were leaking information to Saudi Arabian nationals. How do these people slip in and infiltrate Twitter? And what is Twitter doing on the human side, on the human resources side, to vet these people and make sure they can be trusted to have access to these accounts? And if they determine we can't vet people like that, why does that tool exist at all? I'm sure Facebook has a similar system and Google has a similar system. If they really needed to and really wanted to, they could post Facebook on your behalf or post on Instagram on your behalf. So it becomes a human security issue almost as much as a cybersecurity issue here. So as this hack was rippling across Twitter yesterday, a lot of people started wondering, why doesn't Twitter just pull the plug, stop the tweets? Who knows if it would stop at the Bitcoin scam and start extending to other accounts and saying more dangerous things than an obvious scam like we saw yesterday. And that's another big question for Twitter. What is their, oh no, everything's melting down plan? One thing that needs to be considered is there a way, if this happens again in some fashion, can they pull the plug? Just like the stock exchange reaches those circuit breakers, if the stock market falls down a certain amount, everything pauses, let's take a rest for 15 minutes and figure out what's going on. Twitter doesn't seem to have a similar feature in case of a hack like this, and that's a big problem.
Okay, a lot going on today besides the Twitter hack. let's get to our sound check. Here's a roundup of the day's biggest action and what the top newsmakers and business leaders had to say on CNBC's airwaves today.
The whole business model change of the last decade was to move us into stable, recurring, fee-based revenues to give us the balance. At the same time, to have a world-class investment bank, which has always been our core DNA. And this quarter, you saw exactly the combination of both of those.
We have to make a decision, quite frankly. The virus is spreading in the communities that we serve. And until the virus is under control, then we can't safely reopen.
We're still at the early stage. If you look at the household penetration across the world, it's about 50-60% in the US. But if you look at yogurt, cheese or frozen, it's just down to 4% or so, and it's less in Europe and elsewhere. So there's still a lot to do. So we haven't seen the massive acceleration yet, and that is yet to come.
We have 2,300 items that will be available to DoorDash's customer base. We cover about 100 million Americans. So this will bring, for the first time, Walgreens products in over-the-counter medicine, grocery and household items, and other categories that are totally appropriate for this, COVID crisis that we're in.
Okay, time for today's numbers round. We'll kick it off with 16. Domino's same-store sales spiked 16% in the second quarter. That's according to the company's earnings report just out this morning. Now, boosting those higher sales numbers was the increase in delivery orders in the U.S., as many Americans stayed inside during the coronavirus pandemic. And remember, these numbers are from the quarter that ended on June 14th. COVID cases in the U.S. have been surging higher since then, and states like California and Texas have reclosed a lot of indoor dining and restaurants, meaning that these strong delivery sales may continue into the current quarter. One more thing. Domino's stock is an under-the-radar winner for longer-term investors. In the past 5 years, it's risen about 250%, outperforming its pizza peers like Papa John's and Yum Brands, the owner of Pizza Hut. But Domino's has soared past some big tech stocks too. In the same time frame, Facebook shares gained about 160%, and Google is up about 150%. Next, $9 million. The Macy's board of directors doled out $9 million in bonuses to 6 top executives soon after the department store laid off thousands of workers, according to an SEC regulatory filing. CEO Jeff Gennette received restricted stock worth $3.7 million on July 9th. Just days earlier, on June 25th, Macy's announced it would slash an additional 3,900 jobs, or 3% of its workforce, in an effort to cut costs. Now, the bonuses come after the company decided in February that it would permanently close 125 stores, a decision that was made even before the coronavirus was declared a pandemic and the shutdowns actually started. Now, then in April, Macy's was booted from the S&P 500. In the past 12 months, Macy's stock has plummeted about 70%, while the broader market is up about 6%. And finally, 25. After Hours is wishing a happy 25th birthday to Amazon.com. The e-commerce giant opened for business on July 16, 1995, as an online bookseller, although the company was officially founded a year earlier. Amazon didn't go public until a few years later in May 1997. And if you had invested $10,000 in the company's IPO, that stake would be worth about $20 million today. That's it for After Hours, but before we go, here's one more thing to keep an eye on. Tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern, CNBC is hosting a live town hall in partnership with Acorns. We're virtually bringing together Americans who've been affected by the current health and economic crisis in our country. And we'll have top financial experts as well who are going to offer strategies on how to rebuild your money and your future. Get the latest from our town hall and our Invest in You initiative, which offers financial advice to everyday people, not stock traders, by going to CNBC.com and downloading the CNBC app. we'll be right here in our home office every Tuesday and Thursday with the new edition of After Hours, so be sure to catch us then.